In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Thanks, Lisa. We welcome our good friend Terry Shames, the award-winning and best-selling author behind the gripping Samuel Craddock mystery series. With 11 books set in the evocative, fictitious town of Jarrett Creek, Texas, Terry has captivated readers and critics alike. Her debut novel, A Killing at Cotton Hill, not only won the McCavity Award for Best First Novel, but was also shortlisted for the Strand Critics Award. 4 of her subsequent works earned nominations for the prestigious Left Coast Crime Lefty Award. And The Necessary Murder of Noni Blake took home the RT Review's Critic Award for Best Contemporary Mystery in 2016. Today, we'll dive into her latest page-turner, Out of Control, a taut, emotional thriller telling the story of a woman raised in a strict religious cult who escapes to San Francisco for a fresh start. Terry Shames, welcome to the conversation. And how did you come up with this story?
I, at one time, did real estate for about 3 years to keep body and soul together. And one day, a young woman came into my office and she said that she wanted to look at houses. We had many young women who were bored and would come in. So we had to be sure their husbands were on board because we would show them houses and then someone would say, the husband would come in and they'd say, we can't afford a house. She's just fooling around. So I asked her to bring her husband in. And he came in and he was much older. She was about 24, 25 something. And he was in his late 30s, very dapper guy. And I said, is it okay with you if we look at these things? Is it all right what she's looking at? And he said to me, whatever little Julie wants, little Julie can have. And it just creeped me out. It creeped me out. I thought it was the creepiest thing I'd ever heard anybody say. It was just, even if it was meant kindly, it sounded creepy to me. I kept that in the back of my head for years. And finally I said, you got to do something with this. And that's how the story was born.
Did she get the house she wanted?
She bought a house and was as happy as a clam. Couldn't have been happier. Bought a house exactly the opposite of what she asked for.
Your protagonist, Julie Heller, has this harrowing and inspiring story arc. What influenced you to write her story beyond that single encounter you had in real estate?
I really don't know. I just felt she grew into whoever she was. And as I told you, I write just straight out. I don't really think about what's going to be happening down the line. I just start with an idea and I start writing. So I thought, what kind of background could this young woman have? Well, I grew up in Texas and I knew about Texas cults. And I started writing that and I said, that would explain why she's timid and not quite with it. And I brought her to San Francisco because I wanted it to be set in Marin County, where I had actually been doing real estate at the time. And I knew the area really well. So it just grew from there. It grew and I became more and more happy with it. I really thought it was harrowing, and there was something about the cult that just grabbed me. And then I said, gee, am I too over the top with this? And 2 days after I thought that to myself, I read a long expose in the New Yorker about a young woman who had grown up in a cult, and mine paled by comparison.
How did you research Out of Control?
I read a lot, and I actually knew somebody who got caught up in a fraudulent scheme like this. And so it was easy enough for me to start thinking about that. And then you start reading about it. And of course, everyone knows who Bertie Madoff is and how that worked. So it grew from there. It grew from there. I really don't go down rabbit holes a lot. What happens when I write is I write the way I think things probably happen. And then if there's something I'm concerned about, I'll go back and look at the reality of it. And sometimes I'll have to tweak things, but a lot of times it's pretty much the way you think it is. If you're a reader, which I am. So, yeah.
As a straightforward writer, does your finished product require a number of drafts to get it where you want it to be?
It does, but that's because the first draft is just flat out writing. I write fast. I have the absolutely wonderful gift of being able to just completely focus on what I'm doing at the time. And I can only do that for 2 or 3 hours because it's exhausting. But when I start writing, nothing else enters my mind. I'm flat out going, and I write about 2,000 words a day when I'm doing a first draft. And then when it's done, then I have to go back and adjust those things, because when you're writing first draft, you put all kinds of crap in there that you don't really need. You put things that may lead somewhere it shouldn't go, and you put in conversations that may not be there. I call them golden words. You have to, dig out your golden words and throw them out. So yeah, that's what has to happen in the second draft, and then the third draft, and then and sometimes I'll show it to people and get some ideas about how it can be improved. So yeah, eventually I would say it's maybe a 4 draft or 5 draft process.
We're talking with our good friend and prolific author Terry Shames about her latest, a standalone thriller called Out of Control. Her website is terryshames, SHAMES.com. A lot of us hold on to some of the stuff that we cut out of our early drafts. Do you save what you pull out of your manuscripts?
Sometimes it depends. If I know that it's really just focused particularly on the book I'm working on, I probably won't save it. Or I'll save it just for a little while, and then when the book is done, then I'll toss it. There are things in the Samuel Craddock series. Now, that was for the standalone that I was talking about. In the Samuel Craddock series, there will be things that I save. In fact, the other day, I was looking for something that I had cut, and I thought, that might be an interesting scene. It's gone. I tossed it. Somewhere in the universe, it's lying around unused.
Was it hard to abandon Jarrett Creek for this whole new world that you've created for Out of Control?
I guess it was. I don't really think of it that way. I just think of it as going on a little vacation. And every time I go back to Jarrett Creek, it's as if I just plunge right back into it. I don't have any trouble getting right back where I was. I have this thing in my mind that says, where is everybody? What have they been doing while I've been gone? And it sounds a little weird, but that's the way it is. That's what I do. I want to know who the new people in town might be, or if somebody's died or what's happened. It's just as if I was really visiting a real place. I know the place really well.
How has your audience reacted to Samuel Craddock's growth as a character over time?
People my fans really like to read what's happening with Samuel now. And I think it breaks down this way. Women want to marry him and men want to be him. And I actually have a lot of men readers, which surprised me. I even had one of my favorites was a guy who had a sports TV channel it was a radio channel in Florida, who wrote to me and he said, I just accidentally stumbled on your book and it's wonderful, and I'm going to mention it in my sports broadcast. And I said, I guess that's something. But I've had cops who said they really liked them.
When you get affirmation from the pros, there's no higher compliment, is there? Terry Shames is our guest. We're talking about her Samuel Craddock series and her latest, a standalone called Out of Control. What is a typical day like when you are in the process of creation?
Once I start, I'm really started. But sometimes I go have a cup of tea and I do some stretches, and I'll do a crossword puzzle. I do the New York Times crossword puzzle. But as those things happen, I get itchy. And I start thinking, it's time to get to work. And I say, let me just do this first. And then all of a sudden, I just go to my desk and I sit down and I start writing. Sometimes I have other things I have to be doing, and I have to make a decision about whether it's always a matter of your priorities. And I have to say to myself, is your priority really moving forward on this book, or can you do this other thing first? For example, I don't shop. I don't like to shop, but sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have to go grocery shopping, and if you wait too late, then so what I do is I'll put it in the middle. I'll say, okay, write for a while, and when you get tired, then go do whatever you have to do and then come back to it. Often I don't come back to it, though, because I'm on to something else. But the typical writing day, I will, if I'm really involved in a project, I will write 2,000 words every day. That's my goal, 2,000 words. And I do not allow myself not to make that goal unless there's something really strange going on. If somebody calls and really needs something from me, I might say, okay, today you only have to do 1,000 words, but tomorrow you're back at it, sweet cheeks.
An interesting dimension of word goals for me is what constitutes 2,000 words. I sometimes find myself pushing through and then having to go back later and correct a lot of stuff I don't like.
Sometimes they're just words, just blabbering on. But I'll tell you why I do that. And it's actually focused. It's because sometimes I don't know the character well enough as somebody that I'm working on. And I think, keep putting words around them and see what they are looking at and see what they're talking about and see what their responses are to things so that you can get to know them better. And then you can pare that back later. But it's a matter of just, noodling around with it until you get there.
Some of my author guests have reported that their characters talk to them. Does that happen to you?
Not really. They talk to each other. But to me, I hear people say that. I think, what's so weird? It doesn't happen to me at all. That I had one character who ran away with a plot. It was my third book. And what happened was I had written the first two and they just roared out of me. So I said, okay, this is a piece of cake. So I'm writing right when this young girl shows up, and pretty soon I'm off following her here and there and messing around and doing all kinds of stuff. And I get to the end and I said, this didn't really work very well. There's something wrong here. And as I've said before, it was like I had knitted a sweater and found I had a third sleeve dangling off the side. And I had to go back and redo it. And I realized that this girl had taken my imagination and run with it, and she was not an important part of the book. So I had to really cut her back, cut her down to size is what I had to do. She was a little cheerleader, and she was just as cute as a button, but she shows up for about 2 sentences in the book eventually, and she has just gone wild before. Yeah, you have to keep control of your characters. And I think it was, was it Eudora Welty said, or was it one of those really good writers who said that she writes to see what she wants to say. And in a way, I feel a little bit like that, is that I write until suddenly the point of the book shows up for me. And sometimes I don't know for a while what it is. Like for my second book, I discovered there were a lot of things about brothers, some real brothers and some men who became brothers in combat and that kind of thing. But I only found that out when it was done. I realized that's what it was about. And that was my second book. Now I'm a little more purposeful. The latest Samuel Craddock was about the result of the overthrow of Roe versus Wade in Texas. And it's about the abortion issue in Texas and how really impossible the situation has become. And that was in my mind from the beginning. I knew I was going to tackle that, even though I had a couple of friends who said, be careful, you might be putting yourself in the spotlight. You may not be glad that you did this. And I said, I don't care. I have to write it.
One of the odd things about all this conversation about banning books to me is that there really is no better promotion for a title than to tell somebody they can't read it. If you want to motivate anybody to do something, just go out and tell them they can't.
Exactly. Probably nobody in Florida would read it to begin with, but they do. And I've had a couple of not snarky, but a little aside comments in I never read my reviews, but my husband read one of them and he said, whoa, listen to this. And there was someone who took it badly, and that's okay. That's okay. It's the book I wanted to write, and I'm very proud of it.
There's an old saying that if what you write isn't making somebody uncomfortable, you're doing it wrong.
I think that's exactly right. Maybe not mad, but if you're not getting responses from people, some kind of response, everyone's not going to love every book. And I know people who will say to me, I read your book. And I don't want to say, did you like it? Because it's best to just say, oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you read it. Because what if they hated it? They might be, some people say, I read your book and I loved it. But sometimes they just say, I read your book. And you don't know.
Do you ever share any of your work with others before it's done?
I gave the first 2 chapters to my writers group. And one of the women in the group asked me a question that I suddenly realized what the book was missing. I just had always felt that there was something not quite gelling. And as soon as she asked me the question she asked, I said, oh, that's it. And I immediately went and reworked some of the first couple of chapters so that would be fixed. It's just amazing how somebody can say something that will trigger this understanding of what you're missing.
I found in readers groups that you have to agree on rules of engagement beforehand about how to give feedback, because we can get awful sensitive when someone criticizes our baby.
But also there's the art of taking feedback, because sometimes the feedback you get is not really in line with what you have in mind. And you have to just, when I workshop something that I'm working on, I'll go home and I don't work on it right away. I'll say, let this settle out, because a few things will hop out at you that you know are probably important. And then the rest of them, you say, that's not really where I wanted to go with that. Leave that one alone. So you have to learn how to use the feedback you get.
Terry Shames is our guest. TerryShames.com is her website. She's written 11 Samuel Craddock books, and her most recent is a standalone called Out of Control, available now. Has there ever been an instance where somebody has said, this book is perfect?
It's the first time in my experience that when my editor got it, she came back and she said, I have no notes for you. She said, there are a few little pieces that the copy editor can take care of, but there's really nothing that needs to be done with this book. And I was just flabbergasted. And by the way, I just found out that it is an Amazon editor's pick.
That's huge. That puts you up there with the likes of Michael Connelly. Congratulations. Let's go back to the beginning. What made you decide to write?
Oh, I have wanted to write since I was a child. I always thought that was just the thing to do. I remember when I was 6, I lived on a farm and I used to walk around looking for clues. As a child, what was that all about? So I would read. I was an early reader, and I read Nancy Drew, and I read all kinds of little things that had, my parents gave me books. So yeah, I just thought it was just so interesting to find out what happened. And somebody asked me, it's interesting, the first book I ever put out, I had someone in the audience say, do you write crime fiction because you don't think you're good enough to write mainstream fiction? And I had an answer for him. I said, I think at the heart of every great book is a mystery. I said, you find me one that doesn't have a mystery at the heart of it. And he came up to everyone and he said, what a good answer.
It's a great answer and absolutely true.
A real highlight for me this year was when I learned that Amazon made The Troubling Death of Maddie Benson an editor's pick for November of 2024. I enjoyed writing that Samuel Craddock mystery, and it was great to get Amazon's affirmation.
What do you hope your audience will take away from reading Out of Control?
Oh, it is a book about how a woman can take her power, can grow into her power, can grow into her ability to take on the world. She married in haste and repented at leisure, as they say. And she needs to find out a way to throw off the bonds of this cult that she was in and that has dogged her. She needs to come into her own as a person. So that's what I hope people will take away, is that that's what she's able to do.
Out of Control is the latest from our special guest, Terry Shames. You can find it right now wherever cool books are sold, and you can find her at TerryShames.com. Terry, thanks for the conversation. I always love spending time with you.
Thank you for having me.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.